Hey guys! Are you kinda new to Procreate and not really sure how to blend properly? Well, this video is for you. By the end of this video, you will have mastered blending. You'll be able to achieve smooth transitions, know which tool to choose, know which direction to blend properly, and more. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and also give this video a thumbs up if you're excited to up-level your art skills. So by subscribing, you'll never miss out on any tips and tutorials from me to help fuel your creative journey. Let's get into it.
All right, so for this example, I've used a familiar face to us all, which is Taylor Swift, and as you can see, I've broken out the sections of where I want to blend. I'm going to take you to the brush library. So this brush pack you can actually download yourself in the link below. Feel free to do this. These are the brushes I commonly use when I'm blending out my portraits, so I highly recommend you grab these. So just to start things off, we are going to just go over the two different ways that you can actually go in to blend something. So one is, of course, the smudgers tool, which is that little finger I was just on there in the top corner. But if you wanted to also blend out an entire layer, you can also use the Gaussian blur. And you're just going to be dragging your finger across the screen after you select it like so. I don't necessarily like to use the Gaussian blur when I'm making portraits, mainly just because I want to be able to incorporate more detail into my art. So I usually just use the smudgers tool and make sure that you're on the correct layer. But such as my blending brush that you can grab, I would just recommend using a soft brush when you're going in to use skin. Pay attention to the size of your brush as well and the opacity, because this is going to determine how much you're blending and what your soft versus hard lines are going to be looking like. It all depends on the brush and essentially the amount of pressure you're putting behind it and all of that good stuff. So let's start off by blending out her forehead. So I'm just going to pick out a size here. So as you can see, if I make it too small, for example, you're not going to be able to blend out the areas that you're wanting to. You want to make sure that the size of your brush matches the area that you're blending. So as you can see, this is much better. We're wanting to create quite a few, just a lot of soft lines around her forehead, because foreheads are smooth. They don't have any hard lines on them. And just trying to blend all of that together to really reflect where the light is coming from the middle right of her forehead right there. Great, so that's already looking a lot better. So I'm just going to pull up the reference photo of Taylor so that we can see what we're looking at as we're blending this out, just to make sure all of the colors are going in the right direction and whatnot. So something I want to point out are hard versus soft edges. So as you can see under her chin, that's what we call a hard edge, because there is a line there. Even though it's a little bit blurry, of course, we don't want it to be stick straight, but essentially the way that this works is we want to keep those lines and the integrity of the hard lines, because there is theory behind blending and shading. So for her cheek, for example, that's what we consider to be soft lines. They're all blending nicely together, so we want to make sure that those blend in together well. And again, just choosing a brush that goes well with the side of her face in terms of size. Just to make sure that that gets all blended together. So take your time when you're doing this as well. You don't have to apply a ton of pressure. Feel free to go over the same spot plenty of times, but it's a fine balance because you don't want to go over it too much. Otherwise you will, end up with one color eventually. So you want to keep the integrity of the photo and make sure the light stays where the light is meant to be and the darks are meant to stay where the darks are. But as you go over the same area, it will start looking a lot softer. Just going to shrink our brush because we're going under the eye now. I do have her eyes and part of her mouth and some portions to this portrait on other layers just so that I'm not messing them up as I'm blending out the skin for you guys and doing this tutorial. So this isn't an eye tutorial, this isn't an eyebrow tutorial or anything like that. So I wanted to keep those features intact so that I could show you what it looks like to blend skin, hair, and lips mainly. So this side of her nose is pretty blended. There's very little shadow. It's very, very subtle. So we're going to try to blend that out as much as we can. So we don't want to be blending against the shadow or against the grain. We want to go the direction that a shadow is or the direction of where any shading really is. So her nose is going, for example, it's vertical. So we want to be able to portray that. And this specific shadow actually has a bit of a bend to it. So that's the direction we want to go. Same with the eyes. We wouldn't be going that direction. We would want to be going the direction of the eyes, right? So you want to be blending in the direction of the feature, if that makes sense. This is great as well because you can actually push the colors around. So as you can see, there's a very soft line on the other side of her face where I'm trying to keep that intact just by using the blending tool and not actually even, going back in and using the brush tool again. So just by pushing around the colors using the blending tool, you can definitely achieve some really good results and not even needing to necessarily go back to the brush tool there. So just from looking at this as well, I can tell that her neck is going to need some more color at the end. For anything that I find while I'm blending that I need to add later through the brush tool, I will do that. But I am just going to do that at the very end for the sake of this tutorial. All right, so for her ear as well, we will be needing to add some more tones, but I just wanted to show you what it will look like actually to pull part of her ear in as well. So the top part of her ear, you'll see what I'll do in just a moment here. I'm just going to blend these parts out first. So we're going to blend this up to create the more shadows. We're going to make our brush a bit smaller and then pull this in because there aren't any hard lines in ears except for at the top where there's a much bigger shadow. But other than that, it's good to just pull the colors around, especially with soft edges. Looking much better. So like I said, we'll probably need to add a bit more depth to her face by adding a few more shadows at the end just for detailing purposes, and then also adding some texture to her skin, which I'll show you at the end as well. But for right now, the one thing that I did notice is just to pull her nostril out slightly, just because that's going to bother me otherwise. It looks like her nose is a bit squished there, so I am going to use the brush just to create a very subtle line beside her nostril just so that we can pull it out properly and then blend it in. So next we're going to be doing her lips. So for the lips, I like just to build out the midtones, the shadows again, and the highlights, very similar to the face. And I like to start off with using a soft brush, and then I can go in and use my actual other brush. I'll be adding to this brush pack. I realized I left it out. But here I'm just going to duplicate it and add it into this brush set for you guys. So this brush, the number 5 favorite, so essentially that one is just really great for detailing, and I'll show you what that looks like afterwards, but we want to blend out our lips with a soft brush first, and then we can go in and add in some details and some texture later. So just like the face, we just want to pay attention to where the shadows are on the lips and where the highlights are. So we're just going to start by blending out the corners and moving inward. Again, we're going to have a very small brush for this, given just the canvas we're working with. I recommend having different parts of the face on different layers as well, and you can even alpha lock those so that you can't really go outside of the layer and mess up anything else if you wanted to do that. But I would just recommend having them on different layers, and it makes it a lot easier to work and it's a lot less destructive. So we're going to make this super tiny because you can notice that there is a bit of a darker line at the very bottom of her lip. Almost, it's not like eyeliner, or sorry, not like lip liner, but you want to make sure that that's blended out because she doesn't actually have anything that's considered a hard line at the bottom of her lip. It's very minimal, and we want to just blend it out as if it's just almost like this slight shadow that's being casted. So she doesn't actually have, a darker line at the top of her lips. We're going to try to blend that out. Whenever it comes to body parts as well, or lips, for example, even though they seem like hard lines, they are in a sense, but you still want to always blend out the edges of your drawing, even if it's the edges of her ears, before they hit or come in contact with the background, for example, or her lips in this case as well. So you do always want to blur it slightly just to give it more of that realistic look. One of my tactics as well is, as long as I have something on another layer, is blending out the edges and then going in with the eraser like I am right now and going around the edges of the lips and creating a bit more of a crisp effect, because that way it definitely gives more of a realistic look to the image rather than over blending or under blending. So now going in to use the number 5 tool. So I'll show you what this looks like. So when we pull the light, for example, in different directions, it mimics cracks in the lips, because nobody's lips look airbrushed like that. They do have cracks, lines, and it's just a different part of skin that's on our lips, right? So we want to try to mimic that as much as we can by pulling in the dark and moving that around. So you would want to use a brush similar to this that has a bit more of like a softer edge to it, that isn't like creating just straight up hard lines on your lips, because that doesn't look realistic either. So you want it to have a nice balance of looking like lines versus a blend as well. So I'm really just trying to make sure it's all blended out, and I'm playing around with the size as well. So before, my number 5 brush was a bit bigger, and now we're making it a bit smaller just to mimic some of those smaller details that we see in her lips. Okay, so those look pretty good. I'm gonna move back down to her body just so that I can blend out her shoulders. I like going in between different pieces of a portrait from time to time. I don't always like just hammering out all the skin and then all the hair and then all the lips, just because I find it a little bit more entertaining to do that. But you guys can do, what order you want. So I'm just going to be adding a little bit more darkness to her shoulders, just to define her collarbone and the tops of her shoulders a bit more, because we don't want it looking too flat. So I'm just going to add those quickly. So we're going to be blending with the same brush, which is just the soft blending brush that I use for skin. Another tip for you guys as well, whenever you're drawing a portrait, whether it be a brush for hair, whether it be a brush for lips, or a brush for skin, for example, I always like to use the brush when I'm actually coloring, or I should say, I like using the same brush that I use for coloring as for blending, depending on that body part. So, for skin, I'll use the blending brush to actually paint on the skin color, and then when it comes to blending that out later, I then use that same brush as a blending brush over those same areas. I find that it creates a much better look and really helps with realism there. So as you can see, I'm also blending out of the lines right now, which is totally fine. So this is one of the techniques I use just to create more of a realistic effect. So I'll go in, and I'm not too worried about blending outside of these lines because we just have a background. Pay attention to really, or just a white background, I should say. Because after I'm done blending and making everything look the way that I want it to, then I'm going to go in with my eraser and go over her shoulders to create more of a crisp edge. So again, we're going the direction of the arms, right? We want to make sure it's all going in the right direction. So now I'm going to take the eraser, and as you can see, I'm just going over her shoulder. Get rid of any of those smudge lines. I'm going to go around her face as well and clean up some of these areas. Okay, now we're going to focus on the hair. So the hair is on a separate layer as well, and I'm not going to be using the skin brush. I'm actually going to be using the hair brush to blend this out. So I used this hair brush to actually build out the hair, but now we're going in to blend this. We're going to go on the right layer. and I paid attention to where the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights are, and I just added those in. And now we're just going to play around with the size. I do recommend, starting with a bit of a more medium size. Don't start super small because detailing always comes last. So just try to focus on blending out the areas so that, it actually looks like hair and you don't have any chunky colors or anything big kind of just standing out. So I'm just going to start out by blending. And again, you want to go in the direction of the hair, not sideways or in a different direction. You want to go with the grain, essentially. So sometimes I go up as well. So you want to go from both directions when it comes to hair, especially when you see reflection in the hair. It's important. Also, so once we're done that, you'll notice the hairline at the top as well. So you want to make sure that that's blended as well. So tips for making sure that your hairline looks good. Always pull the skin, up to the head, and then you can always do another layer for the hairline over that, just so that you can see part of the scalp essentially, right? And mimicking that. And then you want to just shrink your brush and pull the hair into different directions of the hairline so that it's mimicking the hair kind of coming out of the head, and you can pull and push into the hairline to make a more realistic effect. So I decided just to add in a bit more details just so you guys can see what it looks like to add those into the hair specifically. So if I go in and want to add in some highlights, I take the same hairbrush but in the brush version here and taking a lighter color and just swooping over some of the dark parts just to add a bit more dimension, because hair doesn't look this perfect usually, right? So we want to be able to add in some lines and add in some details. So you can do that just by, selecting a dark color or a light color. You can even do that if you wanted to pick from the colors that you already have on the hair as well. And you don't have them saved in a palette, you can actually just tap and hold your finger over the color, and Procreate will naturally just adopt the color, and then you can go ahead and use that on your brush. So highly recommend doing that. And we're just going to add in some, crazy lines on the side of her hair, because again, her hair isn't perfect. We do see some stray hairs naturally. Okay, we're just finishing up here, so I just wanted to, show you guys this before I jump to my finished portrait of her, just because I do go in and add more detail after I'm done my blending. I do this over and over and over again. So here is the final result of her side by side. So I added in the earrings and the dress, and by the way, I just added in the dress from the picture. I did not draw that because that would have taken me probably like 80 years. So I just wanted to add that in just for, additional effect to the picture. But the rest of it was drawn. But yeah, so essentially I'm going in and adding in detail and making sure that everything's looking good after even you've blended it is really important. So I always go over the lines of her body as well, or her face, just to soften them slightly, ever so slightly, just to give it a bit more of a realistic effect. In addition to that, what I also like to do is add in skin texture. So this isn't something that I mentioned before because I always do this last, but I take in that brush, the grainy brush that you see in the brush pack that I've been using, but also the brush pack that I'm going to be sharing with you guys, or that you're able to grab in the description there. But what I like to do is I usually use the a white color and use the brush just to go over the highlights, just to make it look like pores. And then I'll go in and use the blending tool with the same grain to go over that again. And then I'll go in with a soft brush, like my blending brush I've been using for the skin the whole time, like I'm doing right now, just to blend it out very slightly with a low opacity. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is the end of the tutorial. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and I will see you guys here next week.